The GeForce 7500 LE. It wasn't impressive when it was released, and it sure isn't nowadays. The only thing that makes this card interesting was its scarcity. You see, the 7500 LE was an OEM card made for personal computers by HP. It was never released to the public, and back in 2006 when this card debuted, you couldn't just walk into a computer shop and buy it. But from what I could tell, nobody really cared. It wasn't a remarkable card by any means. It was intended simply as a display adapter that can maybe run an older game or two, and didn't have a lot going for it. And yet, somehow 16 years later I ended up with one. I got it when I bought 17 graphics cards for $70 on eBay, and I received it in a semi-working condition. I say semi-working because when I initially tested it, it didn't output any video at all. I ended up removing the additional VGA adapter and cleaned it up a bit, which seemed to revive the card, for the time being. I say for the time being because it seems to have left behind a rather unreliable legacy. There's not much documentation for this card online, but most of what I can find doesn't say anything good about it. I found a post from an old GameSpot forum from 12 years ago where the user reports they're having graphical issues while running The Sims 2. Long story short, it seemed that the 7500 LE was already failing only 4 years after being released, which is impressively bad. I also found another post where someone tried to run BeamNG Drive on this card, which promptly killed it. So yeah, I'm surprised I have this thing in a working condition. To ensure that it stayed in a working condition, I cleaned it out before running any tests. It wasn't too dusty, but it was definitely used, and the entire heatsink was very loosely secured. This caused the thermal paste to dry out, and at this point was more like thermal crust. In terms of specifications, the 7500 LE uses the G72 graphics processor built off the Curry architecture. After that, online information about this card starts to conflict. My typical resources, namely Tech PowerUp and Wikipedia, cite totally different specs for it. This includes core clocks, memory clocks, and even VRAM amounts. I ended up just running GPU-Z and Speccy, but even those programs couldn't tell me everything. It did, however, list a default core clock of 550 MHz and a default memory clock of 400 MHz. This led me to find a website called AscendTech that seemed to match my card's specifications. Assuming that this is correct, the card I have should have a total of 256 MB of VRAM. Not the best. It was also built off the 90nm process and had a total of 112 million transistors. It had 2 render output units, 2 texture mapping units, 4 pixel shaders, 3 vertex shaders, and, likely, 256 MB of DDR2 memory with a 64-bit bus width. It also only supported up to DirectX 9, which severely limited the games I could run on it. The only thing this card really had going for it was its support for Turbo Cache. Turbo Cache was a feature that first appeared on the GeForce 6200 in 2004. This allowed graphics cards to use excess system memory as VRAM. This lowered production costs given that it needed less onboard memory and was a good way to boost performance on cheaper low-end graphics cards. Today I'll be pairing the 7500 LE with an i3-4130 and 16GB of RAM. This should be more than enough to ensure that the graphics card is the bottleneck. The operating system I'll be using today is Windows 7 Ultimate Edition. I chose that version because support for the card ended after Windows 8, and I wanted to make sure that it was running in the best environment possible. Driver and graphics card installation went without a hitch, for the most part. I did have an SSD of mine completely die for seemingly no reason, but aside from that, all was well. But before we get into testing, take a moment and consider leaving a like or subscribing because it genuinely helps me out. Thanks. Now on to the benchmarks. The first test that's not good. The first test I'm running is, once again, Userbenchmark, just to make sure the 7500 LE is performing how it should. It's currently doing the graphics card benchmarks, and they're not going too well. It's able to output one singular frame, and that's all it can do. So the testing is incomplete because we couldn't run that one test that required the direct 3D error. But the 7500 LE is performing as expected in the 50th percentile, with a benchmark of 0.17%, which is terrible. But with that, I think it's time we get into the first actual gaming benchmark. Now, I'm curious what's going to happen in Crysis Warhead when I click the Optimize Settings button. Ooh, it changed everything to the minimum spec. That is not a good sign. Well, that was quite the frame rate drop we saw. We're at 10, 11 FPS right now. That is not good, but the game still feels playable somehow. Are you okay, man? You good? I don't think he's... Yeah, nah, he's dead. The game's not running very well, and this is likely not the experience most people wanting to play Crysis are looking for. So, I guess, can you run Crysis on the GeForce 7500 LE? I mean, yeah, I guess, if you want to run it at 20 FPS and 800 by 600 with all the lowest settings. It is stable, it's not crashed yet, but I've not been playing for very long. Anyways, on to the next test. So I was able to get in-game with offline bot practice, and in a resolution of 640 by 480p, we're playing 13 FPS. Honestly, you might be able to play it if like the frame rate wasn't so bad, but the horrible resolution combined with the horrible frame rate makes this the definition of unplayable. I actually got somebody. There is even a little bit of input lag. It's not much, but it's enough that you do notice it in CSGO. Even just moving the scope back and forth is very difficult to do. So can the 7500 LE run CSGO in 2022? No, it cannot run CSGO in 2022. Oh my god, I got so lucky with that. But yeah, this clearly is not doing the best. So the first game I'm going to play is Mountain Blade Warband. We have the high settings currently in 720p, which was the default settings, mind you, and it's not doing too well. We're currently getting an average frame rate of 11, 12, 13 FPS, which is really not good. So I dropped the game resolution down to 720 by 480 with all the lowest settings, and this game looks absolutely horrible, but we are pulling 60 FPS, which is a nice change of pace for once on this channel. So I turned the game's resolution up to 1024 by 768, and we are seeing less than 60 FPS right now, but 47 FPS is nothing to scoff at. This is not fair. He has a bow. You know what? Maybe it is fair. Maybe this. Oh, I got stabbed. Next game I decided to run is Portal 2, which is not that hard to run, but as you can see, this graphics card is definitely struggling. We're currently in 720p with the lowest settings, and we're only getting about 10 and like the lower teens in terms of FPS, which really is not good. Wow, that looks horrible. I just changed the resolution to 848 by 480, and this game looks disgusting. With the lowest settings the game can offer in terms of like quality and resolution, we're only pulling an average of 20 FPS. Yeah, the 7500 LE really was not designed for this, it seems. And I guess we'll see how it holds up in a few more titles. I'm currently in 720p with the lowest settings, and I mean the game's running pretty well. We're getting 38 FPS right now. So I've been playing for a few minutes, and we have an average FPS of 37 currently. That's not the highest considering we're in 720p, and this is a very old game that came out before even the graphics card did. But it is surprisingly stable, so crap, I just ran out of ammo. Either way, the game is still playable, so I would consider this a win. And here we are, finally in the real world of Far Cry. The GPU is being fully utilized right now. It is doing the best it can, and it's not doing bad at all. You know, even though we're in this area with a lot more stuff to render than over there, we're still seeing 70 FPS, which is really good. So, can you run Far Cry on the GeForce 7500 LE? Yeah, you can. It runs really well, actually, and I would recommend you do it. I haven't ever properly played through the entire game, but I did play through most of it, and it's worth it, honestly. I'll tell you this much, it's better than Far Cry 6, but Far Cry 6 set the bar very, very low. Well, you know what? I died. You know, my guy might not be the most powerful, and neither made this graphics card, but hey, it can run the game. So, on to the next test. The next game I'm going to be playing is already running much worse than it should, and it's called Bloons Tower Defense 6. It's also notoriously easy to run, as this series has been known for being a flash game on websites like Cool Math Games. In terms of quality settings, the only thing you can change in this game is the screen size or the resolution. I'm gonna drop this down to 800 by 600, cause in later rounds this game can be very difficult to run. Okay, so in 800 by 600, I'd say this is 60 FPS. If it's not 60 FPS, it's very close to it. I would say it's just about indistinguishable. Either way, this is likely one of the most modern games you'll be able to run on the 7500 LE, as quite frankly, it's pretty crappy. It's not good. Wouldn't recommend buying it. Now on to the next test. The next game I decided to run is Far Cry 2. We're currently in a resolution of 800 by 600 with all the lowest settings, and we're only pulling 21 FPS. That's really not that good. To try to squeeze out any more performance than I possibly could, I dropped the resolution down to 640 by 480, and there's not really a difference. Maybe 1 or 2 FPS here or there, but the game looks a lot worse. This looks like a flash game more than it does Far Cry 2. So I guess with all the lowest settings and the lowest resolution allowed by the game, I guess you can play Far Cry 2 on the 7500 LE. Can I recommend it? No, I definitely would not, but you can do it if you want to. That finishes off testing though. So that's the level of performance you can expect from the GeForce 7500 LE. Not much. You can play a few older titles with this card, but I can't recommend it. Given its inability to overclock and its tendency to fail altogether, this card doesn't really have any good points. I'm just glad it survived long enough for me to make this video on it. You know, most of the time I can find at least one good part of an old GPU, but this one really is the definition of useless. Oh, and we also have a community Discord server where we discuss a variety of topics, link in the description. With that, thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. I've left a few donation methods in the description below, and if you want to directly support the channel, that's a great way to do so. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to it. While you're at it, consider subscribing or leaving a like because it really helps me out. That's about it. Have a great day. Bye.